Hello from Yerevan. This is a podcast Pigeon of Peace where we do discuss awesome skills of troubleshooters. Watch, listen, and use comments below for navigating through the questions. Let's talk about crowd psychology and let's start with the definition.
Let's start with the difference between person and the crowd. When a person sit at the chair or trying to be couch potato, he just staying in his mind and he trying to think, trying to use logic and maybe pronounce very good speeches. But suddenly, if you will collect people in the crowd on the square, they became like a living organism, but not so many as people, as person on the square, but as a single organism. You know, it's very similar to school of fish. When you see one fish, it would go in one way. If you will see a school of fishes, they will live like a single something. So it is very easy to catch a fire. You just pronounce some motto and people maybe will support you and they can start to crush another people or to damage buildings or maybe to try to break the fence or throw some stones in the windows. And after it is started, it is hard to understand what will go further on. Anything could happen. So crowd is not predictable, and it is very important to know how people became crowd and how work with crowd, how divided to create once more people which will live separately. If you'll read some books about period was when Stalin was alive. It was a Soviet Union leader at the time of the Great Second War and some short period after it. You will find that, for example, on the Red Square, this is the most prominent place in the Moscow, in the capital of this country. It was a live fence with people. They will stand each 3 meters in all directions, and they were using their strong bodies or even hands to navigate people. You know, it's very funny. A lot of people which will go separately will flow without any disturbance through those people if they will allow. But if they will stand in chains, they will create small cells and people will have trouble to leave those cells. So in this case, crowd could be stopped.
And when we look into this, I would call probably them points of impact. Like, for example, in your example, there were a man or a group of men who just like regulate the flow. What might be the forces, or like whether it's visible or invisible or any other type of the matters that could affect the direction? And again, like by direction, I don't mean the physical direction only, but maybe even the direction of the mood of the crowd. So what might be those forces?
You know, it's very hard to explain, and let me give an example. I have been to the grand opening of huge stadium in the Donetsk city. It was previously Ukrainian land, and right now it is Russian land. And it was a huge construction which was built by oligarch. And when we have this opening, it was announced that a well-known star, pop star, in the planet scale, her name was Beyonce. He was invited to sing several songs, and everyone was knowing that she was paid a lot of US millions dollars to interrupt her show round trip and to be on this stadium. But suddenly, when she started to sing, all people were leaving those lodges to go to have some food, to have some drinks, and almost nobody wants to listen to her. After several songs, it was time for another star, but Ukrainian local one. It was Verka Serdyuchka, and she was singing a very easy song with no voice, with no words. But a lot of people became crazy, and they were so happy to dance with this music. After it was time to talk for a person who was very important and prominent in this city. It was like major, and he was trying to pronounce a speech, and everything was quite calm. But after his words, it was time for this person who was responsible and who paid for everything to build the stadium to come to the microphone. And it was exactly the moment when you could hear, even if some mosquitoes will fly 1 kilometer away from you. It was completely silence, like dead end, like nothing happened, like no one on the planet was left. And he was pronouncing a very small speeches, and all people were so happy to hear him, to listen to him, and to be with him at that night. And it was a crowd which couldn't be led by Beyonce or the major, but completely could be led by this Verka Serdyuchka show, or maybe this oligarch.
And when we look into ourselves, so when this moment happens, when we become the part of the crowd, and whether it's necessary to actually take control of it, like be aware that now I'm not, let's say, Maxim, but just like I'm part of something which might be bigger, or maybe might slightly different, or also might be slightly dangerous than myself. And whether it's necessary to track this moment and try to detach yourself, or sometimes it's also could be to our own benefit to become part of something.
It was a lot of time when I have been to those мероприятия, events.
Events.
On the events, like for example, I have been several times to London, to New York, Tokyo, and some other major cities on some concert of well-known singers or dancers or musicians. And each time I have been to VIP seats. But anyway, I was very worried. I do not like to go to the crowd because everything could happen. And sometimes at the same places where I have been, it was like throwing grenades. It was like shooting. It was like some people were, I don't know how to say, давили других людей. They were pressing other people to death. It's okay to say to press?
Press to death, yeah.
Yes, and when I was reading those words or sentences in tomorrow newspapers, I was so wondering. I was not hearing anything. I was not listening to the voices. Everything was completely calm. But anyway, several people were died, and it is quite often. The same, for example, could be in marketplaces. The same could be on schools. That's mass shooting. It takes place in Australia, in England, in France, in Spain, in Germany, in USA, and so on. So when you're going to the crowd, you should think about yourself as a survivor. For example, never use slippers, never use too much synthetic clothes. Use some sort of things which will help you to stop bleeding for yourself or for beloved one. The same with money. You should have credit card and cash. The same with documents. You should have originals and also copies.
And when it comes to like how do we exactly should be behaving in the crowd, and let's say this is might be not so friendly environment, and we might be feeling like we're swimming and there is like a whirlwind in the center that attracts us. So what should be the behavior, especially as you mentioned as well, when you're not alone, but you might be with a group of your friends, colleague, or like significant other people?
First, you should have the same goal. For example, you will show some passage and you will tell your people we will meet there. If you will try to catch somebody by hand, it wouldn't help because you could be separated. Second, which is also very important, you should not fall. You should raise your legs so high that if even you will be touched by somebody or pushed by somebody, you will anyway stand on the ground. Third, you should always go with the crowd. Never go perpendicularно.
Orthogonal.
Never go orthogonal. Yes, you could go by касательная.
Curve.
By curve, but almost the same direction with crowd. Do not try to cross river against the stream.
And sometimes we also might be in the position of someone who is actually may want to, let's say, like control crowd or at least manage it to whatever benefit. What kind of things we might be deploy, like what kind of methods we could think of if we do want to do some sort of like a handling or controlling of the crowd?
You know, it's very funny, but we have a skill in School of Troubleshooters, and its name is voice, and we talk about this. And not too many people attend because everyone think, okay, I have quite a good voice. But on the second lesson, usually I tell to the people, and now we will try to shout as to be a policeman, as to be a worker of the prison. If you will able to make the same sound as I will show, in those cases you could stay alive in some very dangerous situation. And when I started to show it, usually I show metal in the voice. There is so-called metallic voice or metallic tune in the voice, and it could be graduated from 0 to 10, and usually even adult men couldn't shout more than 3. And if you will listen how police will do the same, or maybe someone who work with people which are kept in the prison, you will understand that they could shout very strong way. And if you will be able to shout as 6 or 7, you could stop the crowd, but not less.
And sometimes I do believe there's also, let's say, like we still want to manage or handle or keep the crowd calm. There's also maybe some sort of like, I would call them like an agent of the influence within the crowd that actually could, you know, like follow certain orders or maybe certain algorithm or program in order to achieve certain goals. So how, let's say, as a person who tries to organize that, how you should distribute those people, if this is really applicable, and how you should make sure that they help with the crowd control, maybe on a tactical level.
You know, it's very hard to implement this in real life, and I will show you why. For example, you will implement like 20 people in the crowd, but you couldn't be sure that all of those men which belong to your army do not open their mouths and do not tell the secrets to your enemies. In these cases, enemy could implement, for example, twice more people than you, and you will give one order, but suddenly crowd will take another way of behavior. So much better to give as less instruction as you can. For example, you will say, okay, you should stay on those marks, and you will use some piece of chalk to draw some crosses on the ground and on concrete or some other wool floor doors. And on this case, you will be given them instruction when you are ready, but they will not know what will happen in the next moment. In this case, yes, you could operate more safely.
And when we look into the crowd of the live people, whether the same principles or maybe half of them also applicable to the digital crowd, because at a certain point of time, they also might be united by a certain goal, which might not be even visible to them. And yet they might be following some sort of like a proclaimed leaders or even temporary person who just like has a loudest voice.
No, digital crowd has another law of exist, and the reason why, because in metaverse or in a world of intellect, you could use very strong defense. For example, you will switch some leaders of the networks. For example, you will make some illusions. Maybe you will create some walls that couldn't be overcome. So in digital world, everything is much easier and cheaper. And this is the reason why our government and our corporations want us to be separated, to live in small houses. As for example, in Hong Kong, people, they live in so-called I know how to say bed seat studios, which has like 8 or 9 square meters, and it is not possible to do something with полный рост.
Full height.
Full height. You could just lay on the bed and you could watch TV or play the games. And in this TV, you will see the wonderful world. And in those games, you will be a hero.
And my last question will be how knowing about crowd psychology could help to make this world a better place.
It is very sad to say, but if you are a smarter person, you would not belong to the crowd. If you will go with crowd, maybe you will die. You know, my grandpa and my grandma, they were Jewish, and some period of my time, I asked them why it was during Second World War so many Jewish people killed, and my grandfather, who was lucky escaped of this, he told everyone was understand what was happening. We collect our baggage, luggage, and we stand with our children, and everyone would understand that we will die, but we want to die all together, but not separately. So we collected as a crowd, and we were just wait. So if you want, if you can, if you could, better to stay away from the crowd, because crowd has a very solemn, notorious ending.
And we review the skill of crowd psychology and how it could be helpful to you. Stay in peace.